It follows claims Moscow has reached out to China for support, but the Kremlin has denied it. American officials have also accused Beijing of amplifying disinformation put out by Russia to justify its invasion. For more on this, let's bring in Simon Jackman, Chief Executive of the US Studies Centre. Simon, thanks very much for your time. Look, I think what's interesting right now is when this conversation happens, you'll get the same sort of lines from Joe Biden. He'll be warning China there's a cost if you support Russia. Be wary of what you're doing. It's not the right thing to do. But this time he can say, look what's happened to Russia. Look how united the West has been on this. People are willing to pay a price to do the right thing.
That's exactly right, Tom. Biden will be pointing to the way Russia's actions have galvanized NATO, given it a renewed sense of mission and purpose, the way that countries that have been reluctant to spend big on defence are now opening the financial coffers big time, Germany in particular, the way that countries that have been wary about joining NATO are now lining up to join, and be pointing out to Xi, I think quite simply, what side of history do you want to be on? What side of global public opinion do you want to be on? I think at the same time, though, Tom, you don't want to back Xi into a corner. I think you want to present to him that there's a road away from this closeness with Russia that he can take. It looks more like neutrality, and perhaps limiting the assistance to non-lethal forms, perhaps meals ready to eat, according to one report about what it is the Russians are seeking. Is there a way to tiptoe back from, and Tom, remember, it was only a couple of weeks ago that Putin is in China for the Winter Olympics, that there was this long communique issued about how close the countries were. So it's going to be just very difficult to drop that like a hot potato for Xi. But can Biden signal to him both strength on the one hand, but also offering him, here are ways out for you that keep you on the right side of history and of global public opinion?
It does bring me to Sun Tzu, who said, build your opponent a golden bridge, allow them to make that back down as easily as they can. But maybe I've been reading too deeply on this, Simon. What do you make? I'm really intrigued by this. The Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov reportedly heading off to Beijing on a plane and the plane turning around. I don't know how verifiable this is, but it seems, is it indicating cold feet from the Chinese?
It could well be. That now's not the time to do that. Perhaps we've got to have this conversation with the Americans first before we can entertain that. There's no point coming right now. It might send the wrong signal, or it's a real signal by China about what it wants to accomplish. It could also be something on the Russian side, Tom, that he got pulled back by Putin. I think there's an awful lot of turmoil in the inner circle around Putin right now. Some of his statements about traitors and the scum that are aligned with the West. It's obvious, I think, to anybody paying close attention that something is not right in Moscow. The depth and the quality of Western intelligence about Putin's intentions, all is not well there. And don't underestimate that might be one of the reasons that Putin wants to keep everybody close at hand, particularly, and perhaps let the US and China have their tete-a-tete as well. So, it takes two to tango. So it's hard. Who pulled the pin on that? If indeed the pin was pulled, hard to know.
Yeah. So maybe Putin's looking for a rat. He'll be even more savage, you'd think, than Luke Beveridge. So look out. Ukraine, meanwhile, and what's happening there? This attack on the western side of Ukraine, attack by Russia on a base there. A lot of talk about this being close to the Polish border. I guess this brings us to this question, to do with this attack or anything else. What's the red line for NATO to get involved?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tom. That's why this conflict is so diabolically dangerous. It is evidently and patently and tragically dangerous for the citizens of Ukraine, right? But dangerous in a regional or global sense, and here I'm referring to escalation, bringing NATO forces into direct conflict potentially, the danger of that with Russian forces. And so Putin is being hammered by sanctions on the one hand, but the supply trains that must be coming over the border at a fairly steady clip from Poland principally into Ukraine with those shoulder-launched missiles that are devastating Russian armor, with this, these latest announcements about more military aid coming into theatre from the NATO countries. Putin's got to be thinking, I have to neutralize that somehow if I'm to prevail. And that's going to embolden him to launch further into Western Ukraine. And potentially, this is where does a mistake happen? Or is there an attack literally on NATO personnel that have come over the border, perhaps by mistake? What are the red lines, both on the Russian side, right, but also for NATO? When does perhaps an action, an atrocity inside Ukraine, just that's beyond the pale and now we are going in, or going the other way, there's an attack, perhaps a mistaken attack on Ukrainian troops with Western arms, but on Western NATO personnel. And we are getting closer and closer to those sorts of scenarios, Tom, where it would seem then that's the precursor to escalation. And that's the big fear. We are really in uncharted territory.
It is. You get why it's the big fear, and you get why nobody on the NATO and US side wants to give away maybe what the red line is, because Putin knows. Maybe he just makes sure he crosses it. Just finally and briefly back home for Joe Biden, not sure he's getting much of a spike in support for the handling of any of this. I mean, he seems to have been capable enough in the actual crisis itself, but his budget got through because they needed some money for defence.
Yeah, so here, one bit of good news for the cause of bipartisanship in the United States. I think you can sheet back what happened this last week in the US Congress. That is 5 months late. They finally got a budget for the US government passed. Congress upped Biden's defence request, 6%. There's also a lot more domestic spending in there as well. But I think it's the Ukraine moment and the nature and the need to get that money and the arms it's going to supply and the humanitarian aid it's going to supply down the road and into Eastern Europe. I think that was the catalyst for getting this budget over the line. So that's one bit of good news in the American system, if you will. But Biden's numbers through this crisis have remained pretty flat, Tom, and we're down in the low 40s. And it's a real test of our theories about what makes presidents popular. There are no US boots on the ground. This is not a rallying moment that where partisan politics is put aside for one moment. Biden continues to get plenty of flack from Republicans about doing too little and from a few quarters from doing too much. This is not a unifying moment for the United States just yet. Inflation, crime, immigration, they're the countertop issues being talked about around American dinner tables. Not so much Ukraine, and in particular, what a great job the US government might be doing in Ukraine.
Simon Jackman, great to get your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.